What is up, everybody? Welcome to Sales Stories in Real Life 2.0. I'm your host, Alex Bruschi. Today, for episode 2, we have Krysten Conner with us. AEs win enterprise deals using her strategies and coaching. Krysten, welcome to the show. We are going to start this episode like we're going to be starting every episode from here on out, which is immediate implementable value. So, Krysten, let's start with this. What's one immediately implementable tip that our listeners can take away to be more buyer-centric in their selling processes?
Yeah, so thanks for having me and thanks for the great question. I know that one of the things people can do immediately is start looking at how often and how effectively am I selling between meetings. So, what are we sending between meetings that builds people's excitement to come to that meeting or builds enough concern about the size of the problem and the implications of not solving it, that instead of pushing our meeting, they're pushing an internal meeting or saying, we'll have to reschedule that versus rescheduling with us. All we're sending is just meeting requests, and there's nothing that happens because in enterprise, a lot of times it's 2 weeks, sometimes longer between those meetings. So how are we staying on the radar in the best and adding value, truly adding value, like not just staying on the radar? I mean that in the best possible sense of the word.
That's such a great point because to your point, especially when you're doing these larger group demos, maybe a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even 3+ weeks, maybe they're
Mhm.
sitting in tons of other demos with other vendors, and it's so easy to just kind of have them blur all together. So walk us through that. Like, what exactly does that look like in your cadence? What's like an ideal in between meeting, say, touch point or value add?
Yeah. So in that I learned this from the first sales coach I ever paid. And I paid him what I thought was an incredible amount of money for me at the time, but I couldn't afford. But it like 10x my like effectiveness and income. And so we talked about, so I kind of crystallized his advice into like 5 basic questions that kind of map out things that buyers are asking themselves as they buy. So the first thing is like awareness. And the question there is, do we have a problem or a goal that we urgently need help with? Right. The second one, as it turns more to interest, is what's out there to solve the problem. Right. So then they're looking at the whole landscape. And then after we look at the whole landscape, then we're engaged, then they start to pursue. What exactly do we need this to do? Now that we've seen what's out there and we know what's possible and we understand our problem, what have we determined is critical for us to have? And then the next one is, as we get to decision, is this juice worth the squeeze? Really? Right? Like now that we know what's out there and we understand what it can do, what is it going to cost us in terms of money? But frequently now, what is it going to cost us in terms of time and people? How many people do I have to stand this up?
Right.
How long do I have to train these people? What's our IT calendar look like? That sort of thing. And then as they are signing or as we're getting ghosted when DocuSigns are out, the question they're asking themselves then and why we get ghosted there is often the question is, what's next? Once I sign, we're pretty as sellers, we can be pretty clear on how they sign, but
Right.
how they get to value, how they actually get what they're paying for and get ROI, get it quickly, is if we leave that as an open question, that's going to be problematic. And so whenever I say we should be selling between meetings and adding value between meetings, it should be things that answer the questions that they're asking themselves in each different phase.
I love when you turn your thinking to the thinking of the buyer. And I feel like that always is going to get you like warmer towards actually talking about things that are relevant and getting deals done. And I know that enterprise deals is really kind of like your mojo and it's your thing. So what advice would you give to enterprise sellers if, say, right now they're not doing any selling in between meetings, right? They just go demo to demo and they book their next steps and they check the box. What advice would you give for those folks just to get started with some of those value adds in between meetings?
Yeah, and I'll put a little asterisk by enterprise. let's call that complex deals, because I know people that their title might be mid-market or commercial or whatever. But if you are selling a six-figure deal, if you are selling a deal that involves five plus stakeholders that will ultimately a CFO will have to bless this before it goes anywhere, whether enterprise is in your title, you are selling a complex deal and you need to be able to handle multiple stakeholders and you need to be able to sell between meetings. Um,
Good distinction.
so so how I think about this is when they're in that first phase where maybe they've taken like a first call with us, a discovery call, and they're asking themselves like, do we have a problem or a goal that we urgently need help with? What I like to send there is some thought leadership. Notice I did not say marketing material. Some thought leadership. I mean, from like, I don't mean an article our CEO wrote. I mean, we have wonderful CEOs, but I mean something from Forbes, Harvard Business Review, McKinsey, something that is universally well respected, where they outline Gartner research, where they outline this is the shape of the problem, and this is what's happening when we don't solve it, or here's what it looks like when people do solve it, because we're reinforcing in the mind of the buyer, is this a problem big enough to solve? Do they see themselves in that light, right? And hopefully helping them realize that we may have uncovered some things, some problems that they didn't realize, or the size of the problem might be bigger than they realize. So like that's the first question. And I can stop there. That's a lot of words for one question.
No, that's perfect. Because one of the things I remember when you and I did our first episode that like you said that stuck out to me that was so profound is obviously Nate Nasrallah, someone who we both admire, always talks about like why are we like celebrate why are we excuse me why are we studying seller behavior when we should be studying buyer behavior instead? And what you just said, I think, kind of hits that right down the plate. So what would you say the next question is thereafter?
Yeah, you said buyer behavior, and Nate is amazing. I'm going to be Nate when I grow up. But when we talk about buyer behavior, we also need to think about, and this is true no matter what question they're asking or what activity we're doing as sellers, people do not love complexity and they do not love friction. No one needs more of that. So when I say I'm sending thought leadership, I don't mean I'm sending a link. I mean, I am cutting and pasting like ideally a graphic from that really illustrates the point from that article. And then I'm putting two sentences under that graphic. Like, hey, on the LinkedIn state of sales, it looks like X said Y about this problem. Yikes. There's no call to action. I'm not asking them to do anything. And I am essentially taking the value of that article and handing it to them. They don't even have to click anything. I'm not giving them homework. I'm just saying, here is this thing, and giving it in a graphic so that we're doing it how their brains process information, because our brains 90% of the time we want to see it visually. And then the next thing is, when we talk about the next question, is what's out there to solve the problem, right? They have to do due diligence, especially in enterprise. You have to look at multiple solutions. One of the things I like to do here is send something that functions as a buying guide. And that can be as simple as putting at the end of an email or sending as a standalone email, hey, as we've talked to customers who evaluated vendors in this space or solutions in this space, here's 5 questions that they say that they are glad they asked or they wish they would have asked, and then lining those out, right? Because we're kind of lining up there with what Gartner talked about in the making sense seller. People are not searching for more information. There's a ton of information out there. It's how do we make sense of the information that's out there? And if we can be a seller that helps them make sense of the information that is out there, which is not easy to do, we can be the people that they want to work with.
I think you bring up a great point there. And this is one of my favorite things, like particularly about just like learning from, to your point, thought leaders, where it's like such a small shift, but it has such a big impact. Something like sending a snippet or a screenshot of an article versus sending the article themselves. And to your point, making them click through it, making them read the article to get to the meaty part, whereas you just serve it up for them. And to your point, take out all the friction. I mean, they're probably
Yep.
easily twice as more likely to actually get that piece of value that you're trying to give them
Yeah.
by essentially removing all of the friction. And hey, I
Yep.
did the work for you. I put this together. I didn't just send you a link and make you kind of look for it all on your own. That's a really, really, really good tip that folks can walk away with right away. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and you can do that. Doesn't matter what you're selling or how long your sales cycle is. Like that's valuable, right? Like when we talk about adding value, I think that that's the phrase that people mean well, but it's become so used that it kind of doesn't mean anything anymore. And so
Right.
we really have to define what that actually is. And anything that makes me work less is adding value, right? Because I can't get time. Um, that's true for anybody.
Yeah, right. Well, value is always going to be in the eyes of the recipient as well. So, like,
Right.
if you
Exactly.
think something is valuable and you're sending it out, question that. Like, why is this valuable to this person, right? Not just to your point, using the nebulous term value, valuable, and oh, okay, this person must want to see this. So on that train, what mistakes do you see people make when it comes to selling in between meetings? Like maybe they're trying to, but just kind of falling short. What are some of those common
Yeah.
pitfalls that you're seeing, Kristen?
And again, people mean well, and sales is very hard, and we don't get a lot of guidance here. Some of the things that I think are not as helpful as they could be are anything that we produce internally, whether that's an article our CEO wrote on LinkedIn, something that our marketing team put together. Here's a white paper that we paid for. Um, not that not that those things don't have value on their own. That's not what I mean. People can easily go find those things if they're looking for them.
Right.
But I mean, let's be honest. Like we're consumers too. Like when you see something that somebody sends you that you're like, here's something that, here's a guide about this thing and we developed it. It's like, well, of course this is going to be skewed in your direction. Like, you can see this as a consumer all the time where you look for like, I don't know, like what's the best lotion for when my, hands are chapped during the winter and and like Johnson and Johnson will be like how to evaluate a lotion. You're like, God, I wonder if that's going to skew in your favor or not. Like we're savvy enough that we understand that anything that's produced in-house, gosh, may not be super, agnostic. And so that's why I say like let's use things that are universally helpful, universally like widely respected. So that's the first thing is like think like you would as a consumer. Like, do you want to see something that came internally, or do you want to see something that you're like, oh God, like I respect them, right? And then the other thing is I kind of like to ask myself the question of is this something they would pay to know or pay to have?
Hmm.
And so it's like would they like for example when we talk about buyer guides there's a ERP enterprise like wide ERP solution that right on their website has a full like 7 tab Excel sheet on like how to evaluate ERP systems
Wow.
and tells you here's all the things you need to evaluate and here's why and like of course some of those questions are going to be skewed towards what their system does well. However, it's fully changeable like that you can download it and you can take out those questions, but they've helped me not start from scratch. That's valuable. That they haven't given me homework, they've saved me time, right? So that's something like I would that they would pay a consultant to do that for them. So
That's
it's
such
like,
a
would they pay
great,
to have it?
sorry, that's such a really great filter, not only for this circumstance, but any circumstance when you're in selling, right? Like, would this person pay for this? That's probably a good indication that there's value or that certain thing is valuable.
Yeah, and notice the question is not, does this help them? Or should they want to know it? It doesn't matter if if they're like, well, they should care about this. I get it. And also like we're on the wrong track. If we are just trying to be like, well, they trying to make them care about something they don't. It's if we can give an insight that helps them understand something, that's fine. But if we're constantly saying they should want to know about this and you're not getting any responses or nobody's paying attention to it or nobody's like, oh gosh, I never thought about it this way before. Thanks so much for mentioning that. Like we're not on the right track.
Great point. And that I think kind of perfectly ties to the next direction that I wanted to go. Again, particularly for you, who is someone who's a complex seller, right? I'll use the right word now. And that's kind of like your area of like selling expertise. Obviously, complex deals take a lot of internal, external resources, time, human capital, whole bunch of stuff. What would you constitute as like a great buying experience, right? Like what makes a great complex buying process for a buyer?
Yeah, kind of going back to, I mean, obviously it needs to be buyer centric, meaning it meets them where they are at the different phases of the buying like experience. And I would also say a guided experience. And I'll
Mm,
give you an example again as a consumer. I took my kids to Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. I was a history major. I taught US history. Like I could fully geek out in Washington, D.C., and I wanted my kids to love it, right? So I have to put on my hat of a kid that age. Will they want to stand in front of all of the monuments reading all of the stories, or will they want me to stand there reading it? Or could we pay a tour guide company that drives you around in a little golf cart and the person is entertaining and they know all the fun stories
right.
and they tell you the stories as we're driving by? Well, we went on the guided monument tour, which I highly recommend, especially at night when they're all lit up. So it was pretty. We were outside. Somebody was telling stories in an entertaining way. Like that guided experience is so much better than it would have been if I would have tried to like do that myself. Right? Again, like I paid for that happily because my kids walked away knowing what I wanted them to know, and even more than I would have been able to tell them. Right? It's the same here. If we can lead a good guided experience, this is, here's what typically people are wondering about now. Here's what we've seen customers ask themselves, or here's where we've seen people get tripped up. Like guiding that. People want to be guided. Like buyers are experts in how to do their jobs. They are not experts in how to buy our stuff. We need to be a guide.
I think every person who sells complex solution or simple solutions
Yeah.
needs to hear that. That's such a great way of putting it. I've heard some people say like a Sherpa almost,
Yep.
a
That's a
guide,
great
if you
a great
will.
analogy.
That's a really really good analogy. I like that a lot. Let's kind of quickly shift gears to this. Is obviously B2B buying and selling has changed a lot, right? Just kind of the democratization of information. Gen
Yep.
AI, right? We can build tools in a fraction of the time. So there's a lot of competitors. There's a lot of information out there. It's very noisy, and because of that, the landscape and environment has changed a lot. What other changes do you see coming to the B2B selling and buying landscape that maybe people aren't talking about enough yet?
Yeah, that is a really big question. Um, I'm trying to think of like how to condense that down into maybe one specific area. I guess I'll tie it back to kind of what I've been pounding the desk about, which is there is no shortage of information out there. People can look up all sorts of things. They can ask ChatGPT. They don't even need to do 5 searches. They can ask ChatGPT to do it. But I think what won't change or won't change as quickly is again sellers that can give a good guided experience and that are truly trying to guide people to a good decision, whether that's my solution or not. Like that is something that people will reward in one way or another. Like for instance, I had a bank that I was working with in 2020, and I inherited that deal as we changed books of business, which you're familiar with that motion at Salesforce. I acquired that opportunity, and I realized when I was on site with the customer that they did not understand a key piece of what our proposal was to them, and that they had in fact completely misunderstood it. That there was a capability that there was a new leader there, and he was like creating his internal brand and identity on his ability to do things in a certain way. and that we could not, in fact, do everything in that certain way. But he misunderstood that. And so I went to him and I said, it seems to me that you think X, Y, and Z is the case. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. I please don't shoot the messenger, but like this is how it really is. And I just can't in good conscience go on with this if you don't understand that. Because this would be that would be embarrassing for him, right? If he bought this thing and then it didn't do what he said. I mean, like that's not that would be terrible.
Right.
I could have let him think that, or I wouldn't even say someone could have let that go on, right? I can't do that. Um, and we did not get the deal because of that. Like they were like, he was embarrassed that we'd even gotten that far I think he had some egg on his face because he felt like he should have understood that. And, I don't know. I wasn't there in the early part of the deal. I don't know.
Right.
But what I do know is because I took that time, I know that he referred us to 3 other people. Like I didn't get his business because it really wasn't, I mean, it was a heartbreaking situation. Just overall in the whole deal. But I know that he referred me to other people because like I was trying to be a good guide.
That's such a great example. And like one of the kind of like thermometer readings I do in my head of like, how do you come off? Like, I think the way you said it perfectly is you're guiding them to a good decision. I think that's the best way to say it. Because to your point, sometimes a good decision is somebody else. Sometimes a good decision is do nothing. Sometimes a
Yep.
good decision may be to expand the scope of work and look at more
Yep.
stuff. So it can go like any direction, but you're not only getting that trust, but I think one of the themes that you've constantly been saying all day that I think is great is like the ability to be unbiased in your opinions and in your recommendations. Like if you recommend something to a customer that is in theory worse for you, like one of my favorite things to do is like decrease the scope of work during a discovery call. Like, hey, do you need this functionality? Nope. Oh, okay. Well, then we could take this out, right? And then it
Yep.
feels like they're like, oh, you're working with us, right? It's not kind of like us versus you, and we're trying to duke it
Yep.
out for like every last penny. Have you seen anything similar or
Similar to what?
to the ways that you can not tell, but show your buyers that you have their best interest at heart and not just a commission check?
Yeah, I 100% as far as like you said, like so decreasing the scope of work, saying, well, we don't actually need this. Like that is so there were our customers in even in a like a large complex sale where because of the way their functionality, their internal like setup is or functionality or whatever, they may not need like white glove support, right? Like our highest level of support. Be
Right.
like, you know what? In the given the size of your organization, many times people assume enterprise support would be appropriate. In this case, like I don't think you need the white glove. We can always bump it up. Like I'm going to be in touch as you get started, but I don't think you need that. Um, yeah, so that's one of the best ways to get trust is to tell people what they don't need. And yeah, and I mean I've had that even not in enterprise selling. I've had it, even when I was selling much more transactional stuff to just say like I don't think I've told people, I think actually you can do this functionality with the system that you have. And it may be a bit easier, with our stuff, but I mean, honestly, that deal was not going to go anywhere anyway,
Right.
right? So why shouldn't I be the one to tell them that? And then I've literally had people say, be surprised that you're saying that, and then say, well, who makes a good customer for you? Like, who else can I refer to you? Because they know that you're going to tell them if what's in their best interest. And to your point, like a Sherpa, that's why that's such a great example because a Sherpa is like a guide who is their whole job is to help you get to the top of your mountain, which is very different than a national park map, right? A national park map like shows you the lay of the land, but it's not, there is no agency. It's not, I am here for you. It's like, here is the information, right? The Sherpa helps you make sense of that information.
I think we might have just stumbled on something there. Sales Sherpas. I don't know. I might have to like trademark that or something. But no, this has been absolutely fantastic. Sales Stories in Real Life 2.0. We are trimming the episodes down a little bit, so we are getting towards the end here. Krysten, before I let you plug away and talk about everything that you're working on, any last minute sales takeaways that you want to leave with the listeners?
Uh, I would say don't forget about risk, or said another way, risk should always be on our minds. Not only risk in the deal, but what I really mean is how the customer is thinking about risk.
Mm.
Because when we get a signature, many times as sellers, the risk for us goes down. We're closer to quota, we're closer to accelerators, we're closer to President's Club. That risk for us just dropped considerably, right? Now, we might be responsible for renewals or churn. That's a different thing. But the risk in for us dropped considerably. The risk for the buyer after that signature goes up considerably. And if we are not thinking about how do we help them think about that, how do we show them we can guide them through that, that they will come through that better off, we will get ghosted. They will stay with status quo because they don't see a way forward that makes them better off. And so, yeah, just thinking about, I think early stage salespeople want to run away from risk. They don't want that conversation. I definitely did. I thought if I didn't bring it up, they wouldn't be thinking about it. How naive is that? But I definitely thought that for a while versus a tenured, experienced salesperson will run directly at the risk, bring it up. Hey, you haven't brought up training, but I think we should talk about that because you need to, it's one thing to know what our product, the features are. It's another whole different thing for your people to be able to use it at that level. Let's talk about what training they would need or one of 100 other things. But if we are not thinking about risk, deal's not going to go well for anybody.
I love how you made the distinction there too, because as soon as you said risk, I'm like, oh yeah, I think about risk in my deals, but like risk in my deal. And so I think that's a really nice reframe of like think about how the buyer is thinking about risk. So I just took something away there too. Krysten, plug away. Where can people find you? What are you working on? I know you've been very, very busy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. People can find me on LinkedIn, of course. I have my website, KrystenConner.com. And yeah, lately I've been coaching a lot of sellers, coaching individually and then coaching teams, because I would say no sales manager ever would tell you, I have enough time to be able to coach my team. They just simply don't have the time to do it, even the ones that love to do it. And so to be able to talk to a third party about deal strategy, territory strategy, like that's how I got started paying for coaching, because it was immensely valuable to have somebody outside my org to be able to talk through a deal with or to say, like, I have no idea how I'll make my number in this territory and then be able to break it down. So I get all the fun parts of managing, all the fun parts of working with sellers without, I don't have to update dashboards or look at Salesforce or do any forecast calls. So I just get the fun stuff.
Well, for folks out there, whether you're individual, whether you're a company, if you're looking for a sales coach, hit up Krysten. Also follow Krysten on LinkedIn. Krysten, thank you again for joining. This has seriously been absolutely fantastic. Sales Stories in Real Life, fam. We will see you next week. Cheers.